All right, let's dive in. Today, we're taking a close look at a really influential and, let's be honest, pretty controversial book, Douglas Murray's The Madness of Crowds. This book really tries to get to the bottom of the strange, kind of chaotic cultural moments we're all living through. So the big question is, what's the central problem that Murray thinks he's identified?
And this quote from Murray, man, it really just lays it all out. This is the heart of his entire argument. What he's saying is that something fundamental has just broken in Western societies. You know those big stories that used to give our lives meaning and a sense of structure? Things like religion or even those grand political ideologies? He says they've all just sort of faded away. And what's left behind? A huge gaping void.
Okay, so this is Murray's foundational claim, his starting point for everything else. He argues that for like the last 100 years, the very pillars that held up our sense of meaning have been crumbling to dust. First, you had the religious frameworks. The stories that explained why we're here, they started to fade. And then, the big political ideas that were supposed to replace them, well, they lost their grip too. Murray says the result isn't just some abstract philosophical problem. No, it creates this deep, gnawing anxiety across society. We're living in an age that's way better at tearing things down than building anything new to replace them.
And that collapse, it creates a total vacuum. Because, as Murray sees it, we humans have this deep, deep need for purpose. We need a story to make sense of our lives. So when the old stories die, we don't just, shrug our shoulders and move on. No way. We start searching, almost desperately, for new ones. And what Murray says is that something brand new and incredibly powerful has rushed in to fill that exact space.
So what exactly is filling that void? Well, Murray argues it's a new kind of all-encompassing belief system that's built around one thing, group identity. Suddenly, the new center of meaning isn't a shared faith or a national project, but the characteristics we're born with or the groups we belong to. Specifically, things like our race, our gender, and our sexual orientation. He says these have become the main organizing principles for, well, pretty much everything.
And here's the kicker. Murray doesn't see this as just a political shift. He goes deeper. He calls it a new metaphysics, which is a fancy way of saying it functions a lot like a religion. Think about it. It has its own set of absolute, unforgivable sins, right? Racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. And it has its own virtues you have to perform, like allyship and being woke. It gives people a sense of purpose, a reason to get up in the morning, by putting them on the front lines of a never-ending war against injustice.
This comparison really hits the nail on the head. It perfectly illustrates the massive shift Murray's talking about. So on the left, you've got the classic ideals of liberalism, right? Things we were all taught, like judging people by their character, not their skin color, or that an idea should stand on its own no matter who says it. But then, look at the right. That, according to Murray, is the new rulebook, a world where your group identity is the most important thing about you, where who you are matters more than what you say, and where tolerance isn't for everyone. It's only for the groups that have been approved. It's a total flip.
Okay, so if these new identity-based ideas are the fuel for the fire, what's pouring gasoline on it? What's the accelerant? For Murray, the answer is crystal clear. It's technology. He argues that the absolutely mind-boggling speed of this whole cultural shift is being driven by social media and the insane power of big tech.
And he's not being vague about it either. He points his finger directly at a tiny handful of companies, mostly out in Silicon Valley. His argument is that these platforms, they now have this unprecedented, almost godlike power to shape what billions of us see, what we think is true, and even what we're allowed to say out loud. In his view, they become the new gatekeepers of reality itself.
Now, this is the really critical part. Murray says this isn't some unfortunate side effect. No, it's the business model. These platforms are literally designed to find people who are willing to pay money to change how other people act and think. Engagement is the name of the game, and let's be real, what gets more clicks and comments than moral outrage, constant conflict, and watching someone get publicly shamed? He's basically saying the algorithm itself is built to drive us all a little bit mad.
And that brings us to a really scary consequence. You know that little bit of breathing room we used to have between a private thought or a dumb joke you tell a friend or an idea you haven't quite figured out yet? Well, that space has completely vanished. Now, every single thing you say can be blasted to the entire world and saved forever. A small, private mistake can become a huge, public, and permanent crime. And what does that do? It makes having a real, honest conversation an incredibly risky thing to do. So what's it like to live in this new landscape?
Well, Murray argues it's created a culture just filled with invisible dangers. He has this great metaphor for it. He says it's like we're all walking through a field full of tripwires. You can't see them. The rules for where they are keep changing, and if you take one wrong step, boom, the consequences are explosive.
So what are these tripwires? They're the unwritten rules of these new belief systems, and they're always shifting under our feet. An opinion that was totally normal yesterday could get you fired today. A joke you made 10 years ago can be dug up and used to absolutely ruin your reputation in a matter of hours. Murray's warning is that we are all just walking through this cultural minefield, basically waiting for the next explosion.
This phrase he uses, St. George in retirement, is just brilliant. It really gets to the motivation behind a lot of this online outrage. Think about St. George, the famous dragon slayer. What does he do after he's killed the dragon? Murray uses this to describe people looking for battles to fight, especially in a time when we're relatively safe and comfortable. Once the really big dragons, like, actual legal segregation, have been defeated, he suggests that the warriors for justice need to find new, smaller dragons to slay, just to prove they're still virtuous. And sometimes that means they start swinging their swords at things that aren't even there.
And all this leads to a really brutal and honestly super predictable cycle of public shaming. You've probably seen this play out a dozen times. Let's walk through the steps. First, someone finds a transgression. Maybe it's real, maybe it's taken out of context. Then, step 2, the online mob forms almost instantly, driven by outrage and, let's be honest, a little bit of glee. Step 3, they demand punishment. Fire them, deplatform them. And then step 4, the target is forced to apologize, they lose their job, their reputation is destroyed. But the final step is maybe the most important. There's no way to be forgiven. The internet never ever forgets. So in this new world, forgiveness is almost impossible to find. So, wow. After painting that pretty bleak picture of a chaotic, unforgiving world, you have to ask, right? Where do we go from here? Is there a path forward? What does Murray suggest we do to get out of this madness?
Now, if you're looking for a simple, happy solution, you're not going to find it here. Murray is definitely not an optimist offering a 10-step plan to fix everything. He doesn't think there's a simple fix. Instead, to explain the whole point of his book, he uses this really powerful military metaphor, and it tells you everything about what he's actually trying to accomplish.
He actually compares his book to something called a giant Viper mine-clearing system. Now this thing is wild. It doesn't clear the whole minefield. That would be impossible. Instead, it fires a rocket that pulls a long hose packed with explosives over the field. Then, boom, it detonates and blasts a single, narrow but safe path through the danger zone. And that's exactly what Murray says he hopes his book will do. He's not trying to win the whole war, just to blast one clear path so that other people can start walking through this terrain and having these tough conversations a little more safely.
So, when you get right down to it, Murray's goal isn't to crush his opponents or to force everyone to agree with him. His stated goal is much more specific. It's to demine the public square just enough so that we can start having complicated, messy, but absolutely essential conversations again, without being terrified of immediate social destruction. Really, his goal is just to make it possible to think out loud again.
If you want to go even deeper on this, we've got the full audio deep dive on the topic. Just click the link you see in the description.